Adam Gower here, and in today's episode of the Gower Crowd podcast, you're going to be hearing from 30-plus year Skyrise office owner and manager and good friend Larry Feldman, CEO of Feldman Equities in Tampa, Florida. Now, office is truly a tale of two worlds today, as markets like Los Angeles and Portland and others battle with seemingly relentless challenges, while those in Florida are enjoying high occupancy rates and growing rents. And while location is, of course, important, knowing how to manage downturns and thrive during them is something that Feldman Equities has mastered, not just during the last few decades and multiple cycles, but over several generations since the company was founded in the early 20th century. You're going to be learning from Larry what is driving the office market in Tampa by way of comparing with other markets around the country. Be sure to subscribe to the Gower Crowd newsletter at gowercrowd.com. It's totally free, with the only website that focuses exclusively on the real estate crowdfunding and syndication world, providing resources for both real estate syndicators raising capital and for individuals looking for places to invest. It's all there at gowercrowd.com. Just hit the subscribe button to sign up. All right, now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Larry Feldman, CEO of Feldman Equities. Here he is. Larry, it's always such a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let's have a chat about this idea of a tale of two cities, the office markets across America. Why don't we start with what's going on in the Florida markets? I know you have some interesting insights there. What's happening in Florida?
Sure. Well, you have certainly heard that a lot of office buildings are hurting right now in places like Manhattan, Los Angeles, San Francisco, etc. The big urban centers are particularly hurting. And that is due primarily to the work from home problem, that where employees want to work from home to some extent, although many have decided for the purposes of their marriage, they might be better off going back to the office. There are still quite a few that say, hey, I want to work from home, because if I'm in a major urban center like New York, I have typically an hour and a half commute, maybe 2 hours. I have to get in a train, which until recently could be a COVID petri dish. And I'm commuting 3 hours a day doing that and risking my life. And the job market is extremely tight. And so employers who want everybody back cannot force it. So the difference here in Florida is that the joke is that we've been planning for 40 to 50 years or more for COVID here, because we refuse to have mass transit.
Right.
We only have cars. And that is pretty safe way to drive to the office, at least as far as COVID is concerned. And the average commuting time, instead of an hour and a half, is more like a half hour. So while we have seen some of our tenants go remote entirely, I would say that's something on the order of magnitude of 5% of our portfolio or less. And then we have seen shrink down of, say, 25% of our tenants going to the hybrid model, maybe a little bit more than that. Say even a third of our tenants have said either they are now doing hybrid or they're planning to do hybrid in the future. So the combination of going remote and hybrid will have a shrinking effect. And we have seen some of that. But Adam, what's so interesting about Florida is that for every one of those tenants that are either going fully remote or hybrid, and let's call that a bucket of a third to 40% of our buildings, we're seeing at least 1.5 times or 1.25 times that of in-migration and organic growth. And what is interesting, and this is a new report that we just got. And I'll share this with you, and you can put it in the podcast notes at the end if you want. It's the most incredible chart I have ever seen about Florida, which is a wealth migration chart. We all know that Florida has now surpassed New York as the third most populous state in America. We have a massive population boom that's been going on for 50 years, pretty much unabated. We have 1,000 people a day, roughly, in migrating into the state. But what is not commonly known is how much wealth in migration is occurring. And
that's really fascinating. What is that exactly? What does, like, describe the chart if you can, like, what's going on with that?
a good example is a guy like David Tepper, a billionaire hedge fund guy. His home was in New Jersey. He has moved his residence to Florida. When he left the state of New Jersey, he left a $100 million a year hole in the New Jersey state budget. They had to have an emergency meeting on how to patch the fiscal deficit that one man left by moving. This has been followed by names like Ken Griffin of Citadel, is a chairman of Citadel. I think they're number 1, 2, or 3 largest hedge fund in the country. Moving from Chicago down to Miami, he just picked up a mansion for 100 and I'm going to say, don't quote me exactly, it's about 112 million.
Did he buy that from you?
I wish. 112 million. And here's the difference. What's going on now is different from the last 50 years. The last 50 years was characterized by an 80-year-old couple, both in their 80s, in migrating into Florida. And then Florida had the cute little nickname as God's waiting room.
Right.
Now, what's happening is it's a 50-some-odd-year-old couple coming in that are very active, very much involved in their business, and they're taking their whole company with them. It's a whole different method of in-migration that was occurring over the last 50 years. It's corporations and people moving in. So our downtown Sarasota building, I think I recently mentioned this to you, is home to Boar's Head Meats. This is the world headquarters of Boar's Head. The two principals moved to Florida, to some of the most beautiful places in the state on Longboat Key, which is just outside of Sarasota, just outside of the downtown. And they moved the whole company with them. That is the new trend in Florida, and that seems to be accelerating post 2017. As you know, the deductibility of state and local taxes was virtually done away with. You get $10,000 and that's it. And so if you're a billionaire, you are paying through the nose in places like Chicago, New York, and now we're seeing in-migration from your home state.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
Yes, I must say that, you know, here in California, there's this kind of, this breeze that you feel when you step outside of all the people leaving. The air is filling the vacuum that they're leaving behind. Yep. What else is it though about Florida that is driving that? And my question is, it's not just taxes. Surely there's more to it, isn't there? What's
for some people, it's the laissez-faire nature of the government. Depending on whether you're left-leaning or right-leaning, there are, as you know, a certain group of people that really like a libertarian state where you can kind of do whatever you want to do. So if you want to drive a motorcycle without a helmet, or you want to get a tattoo, or you want to have a very loud muffler, I don't know why this state allows like very loud cars, but it's a very laissez-faire kind of state. The government is not on your back. And I think that's one of the attractiveness is the outside of places like Miami and Palm Beach, the housing is still way more affordable than the rest of the country. So right outside of Sarasota, where some of the best beaches in the country are in Sarasota, right outside of Sarasota, you can buy a home, a brand new home, for about $385,000.
You're kidding.
There's nothing
Really?
like that in the New York
That's
area anymore.
extraordinary. I mean, you would need more than that for a down payment here in LA.
Exactly.
Yeah, seriously.
And speaking of California, we just got Jeff Gundlach coming. Jeff Gundlach's considered now the bond king. Used to be Bill Gross. Jeff Gundlach's one of the leading bond funds in the country, and it's called Double Line Capital. He is moving from California, another high tax state. He is a very libertarian oriented guy that doesn't want government messing in his business and telling him what he has to do or what he cannot do. He made a quality of life decision, moved into Tampa, and took his whole company with him. And this is a guy that's in the peak of his career right now. And then Kathy Wood out of New York, the queen of tech investing, Kathy Wood.
That's right.
ARK Investments, her fund has not been doing that well lately, but she just moved her whole headquarters, and she's, I don't know, late 40s. She moved in with her husband, and she lives the next building over. Literally, I can see her condo out my window.
Is this happening across the whole of Florida, or is this city dependent, or what are the within Florida? What are the demographics, or what's going on?
The interesting thing about what's happening to the state is that the highest property value increases, the best occupancy of office space is taking place in the downtowns. And it's the exact reverse of what you're hearing about in New York, where people want to be in the suburbs to avoid the commute and the COVID and all that. The most well-heeled people are moving into places like downtown Tampa, downtown St. Petersburg, West Palm Beach, downtown Fort Lauderdale, Brickell in Miami. This is where a tremendous amount of wealth is coming in. The proletariat, the guy looking for the $380,000 home, is not going into the downtowns. He'll be coming into the suburbs of some of those big metro areas and commuting in, because he won't be able to afford the downtowns. So I'm going back to that graph that shows Florida all by itself in wealth and migration. Those folks are primarily going into the major downtowns. When you get into the Panhandle and places like Pensacola and so on, in Tallahassee, you're not seeing that much growth. It's generally West Coast and East Coast of Florida. And these are, there's a reason for that goes back to the highway systems. I-95 lines up with New York. So you can take Interstate 95 right from New York all the way down to Miami, and Interstate 75 lines up with like Ohio, and then you can branch off and get really come from Chicago via I-75. So the cities that along those axes, which are the West Coast cities and the East Coast cities, are fueled by in-migration originally coming from those interstates, and now it's got enough critical mass, and there's a great quality of life in the beaches, both on the East Coast and the West Coast.
What is, so that's kind of curious though, because the distinction between urban and suburban, downtown and, these suburban locations, it is not a business climate or income tax related differentiator, right? Why are people coming downtown in Florida and not moving to Florida suburbs? Like what's going on with that? Yeah,
it's a little counterintuitive. The dynamic of that is what I'm seeing in the office space business right now, which is there's a tale of two worlds, both geographically that we just talked about at length. And then there's a bifurcation within the office market, which is front office, back office. So the product type that is hurting the most right now is the deep suburban, gigantic floor plate, what we refer to as call center or back office building. Those are very hurting right now. Even in Florida, they're in the deep suburbs, we're seeing vacancy rates of 25%, whereas in downtown St. Petersburg, we're 3 or 4%. Downtown St. Petersburg is a very wealthy, affluent, highly educated workforce doing things like law, investment banking. Now Kathy Wood is in downtown St. Pete doing tech investing. Jeff Gundlach with the bonds in Tampa. These are very high intellectual property folks who have decided, because of their roots either in New York or LA or Chicago, they're feeling more comfortable being in an urban environment, and they want to hire the best talent. The millennials that they're hiring, that are the best educated, totally computer savvy folks, are all wanting to be downtown, the 24/7 nightlife, the bars, the restaurants. I had a company, I think I told you this story. The CEO is negotiating to come in one of my buildings in downtown. He says, "You know why I want to come into your downtown building and move out of my suburban building?" I said, "Why?" He said, "Because the bars are open till 3 a.m. in St. Pete." And I started laughing, and he's not laughing.
He's serious. Yeah.
He was serious, because he's saying the kind of tech people that he needs to hire, that's what they want. They're driving, and they're taking an $8,000 bicycle to work. They're going to have the coffee at the fancy coffee shop for the $7 coffees, and then they're going out to party, and then they do it all over again the next day. Get on their bike in the morning and do it all over again. That lifestyle is really what the millennials want. The corporate users who are going into the downtowns are chasing those millennials, and it's a soft form of age discrimination. You will never hear that printed anywhere because it's illegal to discriminate against age, but that's what's happening.
And you also have really good residential areas close to offices as well, don't you? In Tampa and St. Pete, for example.
We do. And that's been the rejuvenations of our downtowns, from West Palm to Fort Lauderdale to Tampa, St. Pete. All of these markets are enjoying massive migration due to the influx of apartment buildings and condos. Condos for the wealthy, apartments for the millennials. For the city to have great action, you want to see the young people, because even the old people who are buying the $2 or $3 million condos, they want to be around young people. And that creates this 24/7 nightlife, and it creates the quality of life of a downtown. That's what's all new in the last 20 years in our Florida downtowns. Our Florida downtowns used to be sleepy places that were 100% office. With all the high-rise construction now in those markets, it's creating a 24/7. So a restaurant can be busy both at lunch, at the happy hour, 5 to 7 o'clock, and then everybody comes home. The residential buildings take over, and now the dinner and after dinner scene picks up.
So what are you seeing in terms of occupancy rates, renewals, lease terms, lease rates, etc.? What's going on with the economics of office in Tampa and St. Pete and Sarasota, of course?
It's a funny thing you asked me about this, because sometimes I state what certain vacancy factors are, and people look at me like, why is this man lying to me? What am I not getting here?
Right.
Some of our vacancy rates, like in downtown and suburban Sarasota, we're 3.8%. We've had hundreds of thousands of positive square footage, hundreds of thousands of square feet of positive absorption in Sarasota recently. Our St. Pete downtown is probably the lowest vacancy it's ever been, in the threes right now. And downtown Tampa is a little bit softer. It's about roughly 10 to 12% vacancy. The suburban Tampa is softer. The downtown is much stronger, and absorption is all tending towards the downtowns. But generally speaking, Florida has had a much better time of the office market than 90% of the country, maybe Texas being an exception and a couple of states like that.
Are people coming into the office, or are you sitting on leases that are long-term leases, but nobody's showing up and they're just waiting to come to the end of their term?
Well, for full disclosure, I am normally working
on the office. I
am WFO, work from office, not WFH, work from home. We call it WTF, WFH. But
I don't want to know.
I had meetings all day in downtown St. Pete, so I wanted to jump on this podcast this afternoon. But normally occupancy in our downtown portfolio, which is the bulk of our portfolio, is about 70%, although we're about 93% leased. So we're not back yet at full occupancy. We don't know if we're ever going to get back to full occupancy because of the hybrid thing. I have my own theories on hybrid, and I could probably take up a whole podcast talking about that, that it eventually will die. And but I'll just give you a great anecdote of a dialogue between Joe Kernan of CNBC and this guy on Shark Tank, the bald-headed gentleman called Kevin O'Leary. If you haven't seen it, it's a great clip. Kevin O'Leary says, "Joe, get used to it. The office is dead. Nobody's coming back to the office." And Joe says, "You know, I don't agree with you. We're all back here at CNBC. We're doing much better." And he's, they're actually face to face now. This thing, as soon as we go into a recession, employers are going to say, "Get your rear end back in the office." He says, "You're wrong, Joe. You're wrong." He says, "I just got back from safari in Africa, and I got back to the office. It was dead. I was the only one there." "Oh," so Joe said to him, you just got back from safari? Why did you bother going? Why didn't you just put the goggles on and watch the animals that way?"
Yeah, it's a good point, right?
I just couldn't. It just struck me funny, so I wanted to repeat it. But
now you guys play a really good defense and offense game. Defense in the sense that you prepare. What I'm leading into here is amenities, right? How to restructure your properties, how to renovate, the lobbyectomy, the officectomy, strategies that you employ that have been so successful for you. But you also play offense, don't you, during these downturns in terms of capturing market share. So in that context, describe what the Feldman Equities strategy is to winning the office market game.
Thank you. I have lived through so many recessions, I'm embarrassed to count how many I have lived through because it would reveal my age. When we get into these downturns, we don't sit with vacancy. We get very aggressive. Although I will tell you, in our markets, we've seen 10% rent spikes in the past year alone in our downtown markets, which is completely the reverse of what's going on in many parts of the country.
Right.
We double our advertising budgets when things are a little bit iffy. So if we go into a downturn, we'll outmarket everybody. If we go into a serious downturn, if we have to, we will give more free rent to credit tenants. We want to keep our base rent up, but we'll give more construction dollars, incentives up front to our tenants, free rent, whatever we have to do to increase market share. And we go crazy with marketing. We just, we're touching the real estate brokers almost every single month or every week with some kind of a communication. We once, I think I mentioned this to you before, we once sent out live trees to every single real estate broker in New York City. These were seedlings, actually, of a full-size tree of what we were planting in our atrium in that particular high-rise in Midtown Manhattan. And then your tree arrived in a seedling plastic wrapper with a root ball and planting instructions. And then if you flip the planting instructions, it had a leasing pitch on it and a leasing phone number to call. We'll do anything to get the attention of the brokerage community, to be a standout, and we'll do whatever it takes to capture and really take more market share if we get into a recession. We are not currently in recession. As I say, we've actually seen in certain of our markets 10% rent spikes. Now, the suburban product, we have a couple of buildings that are sort of close in suburbs. Those rents are kind of flat right now. So we're not seeing.
But you've been talking about the shift due to COVID and the challenge of competing with work from home. And the way that you meet that challenge is through amenities, and that also helps you compete in the market. So tell me, what's going on with amenities? How is that changing? How are office buildings changing to accommodate this new environment?
Good question. Going back to that comment that Kevin O'Leary made that the office is dead, what he should have said was that the old, dull, boring campus setting building 20 miles out of the suburb into the suburbs, which was just a pure office building with a dead lobby, that is dead, in my opinion. Those buildings that are not fully amenitized to state-of-the-art amenitization, and the best example of comparing and contrasting, I sold a building about 5-6 years ago, which was a giant floor plate suburban type building. Typical tenant was 40,000 square feet. That building right now, thank God I sold it, has got a lot of vacancy. It's a building in suburban Tampa. But it had a tiny little fitness center. That was its only amenity. It was fully leased, and so we didn't spend the full amount of money we normally do there. That was the exception to the rule. Every building we've owned, we've always put in amenities. We're just now going to a whole new level of amenities. So our downtown Sarasota building is a building that has, in terms of amenities, the following. It has a cocktail party zone with a bunch of cocktail bar settings. It has a shuffleboard area, a billiards table, an outdoor, indoor seating area complete with Adirondack chairs and a big expansive lawn with beautiful landscaping so you can go indoor and outdoors. And it has all kinds of soft seating, laptop, 24/7 Wi-Fi. It has a full, complete, first-class gym, the kind of gym you'd pay $40 a month. I'm not talking about a couple of treadmills and a TV. I'm talking about a big, expansive gym. It has not one conference center, but it has two. It has one that is a typical kind of boardroom conference center where you can have a board meeting for 20, 25 people. And then we have one that can seat as many as 50, 60 people, a massive training room, gathering room for a large group of people. We have a bank branch in the building. We have a restaurant in the building. This, as a package, is full amenitization. It's service-oriented and play-oriented, and that the play part is the new thing We're even doing all of those things in our Fort Lauderdale building, and even talking about now introducing a vegetable garden for the tenants to actually grow their own vegetables.
That's interesting.
So you're trying to get a community orientation where people want to come back to the office, because at 5:30 at night, this cocktail party zone is a very active hangout. Our downtown Park Tower building has a wine bar it's a coffee house that converts to a wine bar in the evenings. These are the kinds of things that you need to do to bring tenants back in, because the employers really want the employees back, but they cannot put a gun to their head and say, you have to come back. So they're using the carrot in the form of moving out of the boring, old, stodgy buildings. They're dumping those buildings en masse, going into the fully amenitized buildings as a way of inducing their employees back to the office. So that goes together, primarily suburban versus downtown. The fun in the downtown, being in downtown, the happy hour effect. As you come out of the office, you have the bar right down at the bottom of the building, or you can go bar hopping to 5 more bars down the block, or as many as you would like. Those are all the things that we have in our downtown buildings.
Yeah, and this is something you offer to tenants at no additional cost, don't you? So they have all the amenities, but they're able to rent a smaller space, but yet still have the advantage of all this stuff. And that's a competitive edge, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And the conference room for 60 people is a great example where people want to go hybrid now. They may say, okay, I don't need 10,000 feet. I'll go to 6,000, but I need a big room where I can gather everybody for that one day a week where everybody's in the office, or whatever the time frames are. So we say to them, okay, lease 3,500 feet, don't lease 5,000 or 6,000 feet for the one in 100 years or one in a month situation.
Yeah.
Leverage off of our conference room. That helps us capture more market share.
Yeah, fascinating. And it also helps you diversify the tenant base as well. So it's kind of insulating in that way also.
Yes. Yes.
So when we last spoke, Larry, we talked in these terms, and we discussed this, and we wrapped up and decided to do a podcast, because at the end of that conversation, you did suggest some notes of caution to, the sense of well-being that you currently feel in Florida. Just articulate a little about what those concerns are that you have, and how you guys are insulating your portfolio against those.
Now, just to be clear, are you talking about physical well-being, somebody's physical health?
No. I got the sense that you were confident that it sounds really fantastic, and he said, "Yeah, I just want to be careful. I don't know, jinx it by talking about how good Florida market is right now." But
right.
you gave me the sense that you thought, well, this could happen. That it's not. You've been through so many cycles. You know that this time is not different. That there's going to be waves. There's going to be cycles. What are you seeing in the future? What's your prognosis for the future of office in Florida?
Well, the obvious item are the macro factors that are a little scary right now, which is that when we get into a potential downturn, for the last 40 years, we've had the Fed put, where we could just basically, as things softened down, we knew the Fed was going to give us a bunch of free money and perk up the economy. This time around, they seem to be slamming on the brakes and holding the brakes hard, keeping rates up high. Now, if they do that for a protracted period of time, where we do not see rates coming down for a long period of time, in fact, they're over 6% now on a 30-year mortgage, we could see the 30-year mortgage pricing a lot of people out of the market. We could see a softening of our housing market. If that happens, the whole state is generally a real estate driven state. In 08, it was not a pretty picture. We had, we saw a big out migration of people, home building contractors, mortgage brokers, real estate brokers. We are a very real estate dependent state. The difference, though, is with that wealth migration we have seen a much greater diversification of wealth coming in.
Did you want to close your door or something like that?
Sorry.
No problem at all. So are you seeing any opportunities, any buy opportunities? I mean, we talked briefly about ground up. You're looking at some strategic adjustments. So what are you seeing in the market? Yeah.
Prices are coming down, particularly for the suburban commodity type product office. We have not yet seen a significant or any kind of decrease for urban prime core product. We just sold our Wells Fargo building for $120 million, we paid $44 million for it back in 2012. That's an example of what is holding up very well in pricing in the downtown office. But I feel like the suburban product is beginning to soften, and I think that if rates keep rising, that's going to have a softening effect potentially on everything, because at the end of the day, our largest single expense ahead of utilities, cleaning, etc., is our interest expense. So if interest rates keep rising, there's no doubt that it's going to have an impact. Now, there are some folks who see the glass half full and say, well, inflation is great, and we've got the best rate inflation hedge, because let's say we buy a building for $300 a foot that costs $500 to build 2 years ago. Well, next 2 years it'll be $600 to build, and our basis of $300 a foot looks fantastic. So that's the glass half full argument. There is a real scenario which we have in a number of our buildings, where we were fortunate enough last year to lock rates as low as 3.42% for 10 years. One of our major buildings, that is like printing money right now, because we locked in our most expensive item normally at the lowest possible rate. And so as other competitors have floating rate debt, they're going to have to keep raising rents to keep pace if they can with inflation, whereas we're sitting pretty. So it all depends upon where you are on the interest rate lotto spectrum. I remember about 2 years ago buying interest rate caps that had durations of 4 or 5 years. I still have 2 to 3 years to run on a number of those. We paid $300,000 for one that just was priced at $2.5 million. So maybe we should go into the derivatives business, because we got very, very lucky with that. But I know of a situation where an owner has very thin, has a lot of debt, and I can't go into what it is, but that particular owner is on a floating rate debt, and his cap expires next month, and it's not going to be good.
Larry, let's wrap up with 3 final questions. So the first one is, what are the daily habits? I've asked you this before, but in the context of the world as it stands today, post-COVID, what are the daily habits that you have that make you successful?
Good question. I think in terms of daily habits, it's looking beyond the immediate horizon. There's an old expression that I love, which is, when you're at the bottom of the mountain or the hill, it's very hard to see the top. When you're at the top of the mountain, it's very hard to see the bottom. What I try to take sight of is really, I've been through so many of these cycles. I really try not to get terrified by the moment. Now, it's easier said than done. I'm giving you what my daily habits really need to be fully. I'm telling you, I always do it because I look at the stock market some days and I go, oh my God, what the hell? And then I say, how many times, Larry, have you seen the markets go up and down? And you know that if you buy great locations at way below replacement cost in a market where you have wind at your back with demographics, you really can't freeze and paralyze every time you get into a situation like we're in. And because otherwise you'd be in a perpetual state of paralysis. So I try not to get too caught up in the moment of what is happening. And it's sometimes easier said than done, but that is a daily habit that I really strive to adopt.
Now, I know that you've been in the office building industry, you've been in real estate for a very long time. In fact, you predate Otis Elevator, I think. Am I right in that? What has been different about the lessons learned in the last couple of years? Have you kind of gained more insights and something that you carry forward that informs your decision making going forwards just from the last couple of years and the downturns that we've seen then and now?
I think that COVID and how it's impacted office has really forced us to be better and really pick up our game. The things that I just described, where we're putting in cocktail party zones and shuffleboard and cornhole throwing, and we even have one place where you have bocce ball. I don't even know how to play bocce ball. I've seen it on the mafia movies. That's about all I know about it. But these things, if you told me I would be doing those things 5 years ago, I would have said, well, I think that's a little bit of a stretch. So we're really getting better and better because we have to. And one of the things we're doing now in many of our buildings is we have COVID systems that are treating all the air for the whole building. And you say, well, Larry, why spend that kind of money? Because COVID looks like it's going, and you just, you got a temporary problem. Well, the systems we're putting in actually purify the air from allergens, little small insects and other problems, and actually makes the air smell better because we do ionization processing of the air. It's like electrical charging of the air with UV light. It's a whole process similar to like a thunderstorm where you smell that fresh, clean air. So people are reporting that their allergies are down in the building. These things, we never would have spent the money, truthfully, till we had the necessity to do it. So I've learned that. And, I've always met with my tenants regularly, and sometimes I get busy on the next deal and everything else. We're going back to those roots. We're getting to once a week meeting with a tenant for lunch. That's 50 lunches a year where we are meeting. So by the time I'm done with that year, I've met every tenant in a building, and then the next year we're going to do the next building. And I have my son tag team with me, so we do that.
That's incredible, Larry. You literally, you personally do that. That's incredible.
I don't always keep to the schedule, but it is a policy of the company to work towards that. So those are all the things that COVID kind of made us better and woke us up and said, hey, you're not sitting on an annuity here that's guaranteed. You've got to re-up your game to even a better level than before. We were doing amenities 20 years ago, but it was a fitness center and a conference center. That was pretty much it. And then now we're hitting the restaurants, we're hitting the fitness centers, we're hitting the play zones, the cocktail parties, etc.
Fascinating. All right, last question for today.
Sure.
Investors, individual investors, they're feeling the pain of what's going on in the economy. Stock market's down, interest rates up, so home prices are there's pressure, downward pressure on home prices, and inflation, of course, eating away at the value of savings. So what advice do you have for individual investors looking for safe havens for their savings and their earnings today?
Right. Well, you can never time a market, just like good, savvy, old-time stock market advisors will tell you. You never know where the bottom is. So going back to my first comment, freezing and saying, well, the market's going down, I can't buy now. In a way, this is a great time to buy. I don't say you should back up the truck and take your life savings and dump it into a real estate deal. But when people are beginning to panic, that's when Warren Buffett gets greedy. What's the expression?
Blood on the streets.
Blood on the streets, I get greedy, or something like that. There is a lot of truth to that. Every cycle where I have seen downturns, and I've seen a bunch of them, when I got aggressive and started buying, it has always worked out for me in the long run. But you got to do it with a fairly low amount of leverage. You don't want to go in with a lot of debt. You want to fix the debt, the rate of the debt, so you get through any, if we get into a sustained period of inflation, you don't want to be on floating rate debt, pay up to get the fixed rate debt. But don't be afraid to buy right now. It's not the time to paralyze. If you want to wait a little bit more until there's a little bit more panic, okay, that's fine. But you can't always time the market exactly.
Larry, just always such a pleasure to see you. Thanks so much indeed for spending your time with me today.
Thank you. As always, you're a great listener, listening to my endless diatribes. Thank you, Adam.
That was Larry Feldman, CEO of Feldman Equities, discussing Office, A Tale of Two Worlds. Be sure to subscribe to the Gower Crowd newsletter at gowercrowd.com. It's totally free. We're the only website that focuses exclusively on the real estate crowdfunding and syndication industry, providing resources for both real estate syndicators, raising capital, and for individual investors looking for places to invest their money. All that at gowercrowd.com. Just hit the subscribe button to sign up for free. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening, and thank you, Larry, Mr. Lobbyectomy himself, CEO at Feldman Equities, for being my guest today and for being such a good man and dear friend. Thank you truly for everything. That's all for this episode. I'll see you next time. And for now, this is Adam Gower signing off.